Hello, Meoni here, and welcome back to another lore reading. Due to popular demand and some requests in the last tea time, I decided to continue my lore series of reading out Final Fantasy XIV's official lore, as told in various publications, including the Lodestone of the previous years, and of course in this wonderful book that I managed to purchase from the Square Enix store called Chronicles of Light, which is a really good book, and it basically combines all of those short stories together in basically a collection book. I really like this. It's definitely worth purchasing if you're into the lore. But yeah, regardless, today we're going to be reading a Tales from the Dragonsong War chapter, and in particular this one I believe is called Through Fire and Blood. A gasp escaped his lips when he saw them, 11 wings too numerous to count, beating rhythmically overhead. For a blessing, the dragon showed no interest in him, a lone shepherd boy tending a flock scarcely worth of the name. No, their sights were set upon something more substantial, and they continued on their course towards... Oh no! Dread gripped him like a vice. He broke into a run, half bounding, half rolling down the hillside. Regaining the trail, he followed it east, where the dragons were headed, to the village. After what seemed an eternity, the boy stumbled onto the muddy thoroughfare. All the way he had told himself that the village might be spared, but the dragons had designs of some other place. But now the truth asserted itself. Devastation spread out before him. Piles of splintered wood and rubble lay where houses had stood, while haystacks, sodden from the recent rains, spewed forth plumes of white smoke. Though his chest was ripe to burst from his headlong dash, seeing the carnage imbued him with a desperate energy, and he broke into a run once more. Though the acrid fumes choked his lungs and stung his eyes, he did not slow his pace. Please, alone, please let them be safe. The fury did not hear him. Rounding a corner, his heart caught in his throat as the remains of his home swung into view. The roof had fallen in on itself, bringing one of the walls down with it. Passing the splintered fence, he found his parents. His father's arm lay across his mother, as if shielding her from the wind. But the scorched earth told a different story. Though a deathly numbness had begun to overtake him, his legs continued moving of their own accord, taking him inside the cottage. There he discovered his younger brother sprawled upon the floor, his body obscured by fallen masonry. His face was untouched by the violence, his expression serene. At a glance it appeared as though he was simply asleep and would open his eyes at any moment. He would have given anything for it to be so. All hope extinguished. The boy's strength finally deserted him, and he fell to his knees. With a trembling hand he reached out to stroke his sibling's snow-white hair, tears drawing pale lines upon his soot-blackened cheeks, but the sorrow soon gave way to rage. He cursed Nidhogg and his brood for taking from him all that he held dear, and he cursed fate for condemning him to live on. "Wake up! You weren't among the fallen, as I recall," a commanding voice tore Estinian from his nightmare. He found himself propped against a rocky outcrop. Through blurry eyes he made out a male silhouette. His head swimming, he mumbled the first name that came to mind, that of his adoptive father and mentor. Alberic. "Nay, friend. Alas," the figure replied, "we would have fared better had he had been with us. Here, drink this and clear your head." Estinian gratefully accepted the proffered skin and gulped greedily, the water soothing his parched throat and restoring his senses. Pausing after a long draught, he stole a glance at the dark-haired man crouching next to him. His armor identified him as a fellow temple knight. By his reckoning, they were of an age no more than a few years past 20. Estinian had seen him before, but he had no name to put to a face. Since joining the Order, he had always been something of a lone wolf, spurning contact with his comrades in favor of honing his skill at arms. "My thanks, sir," Estinian began. "Aymeric, and you are quite welcome," the dark-haired knight responded, a hint of amusement in his voice. Glancing over his shoulder, his tone became grim. "I fear we are the sole survivors." Regaining his wits, Estinian scanned his surroundings and stifled a gasp. The scorched field was strewn with bodies of a dozen knights, their armour blackened and their flesh fairly cooked. In an instant, it all came back. He and his unit had been dispatched to Ever Lakes in response to a dragon sighting. As they traversed hilly terrain, a massive red beast had descended upon them, half perished in its searing breath before they could even draw their weapons. Leading the counterattack, Estinian had succeeded in wounding and repelling the dragon, only to succumb to the smoke. Though the air had now cleared, the stench of burning grass still lingered, fuel for that accursed dream. The remembrance, together with the scene of carnage, stoked the fire in him that ever smouldered. Vengeance. Such pain as I have suffered, I shall visit upon them 1,000 times over. Estinian turned his attention to Aymeric once more. I have a knack for surviving, whether I will it or no. He clambered to his feet. A wave of dizziness swept over him, and he nearly found himself back on the ground. Shaking it off, he picked up a lance to replace the one he had lost. Satisfied with its point, he turned to leave. After a moment of puzzled silence, Aymeric called after him. The Holy See is the other way. You are free to head back, Estinian replied simply, but I mean to finish what we've started. You mean to go after the beast alone? That's tantamount to suicide. Besides, you have no way of tracking it. A knowing grin played upon Estinian's face. Ah, but we do. Behold, he said, gesturing to a trail of blood from the blow I dealt to its underbelly. With that, he spun upon his heels and strode away before Aymeric could utter another word of protest. For hours on end Estinian walked. The sanguine trail led him across hill and vale, forest and plain. At length it descended into a ravine, where it suddenly veered off and disappeared into a cave. Estinian took a deep breath and entered, his eyes gradually adjusting to the gloom. About 100 paces in, the cave opened into a chamber, and there, at the far end, he found his quarry, its scaly form curled up tight. I shall show you a nightmare such as you showed me. Estinian drew his lance, checking his grip once and again for good measure. Then he charged. The flurry of footfalls roused the dragon, which reared in fury and bellowed a deafening challenge. In the next instant, a stream of swirling flame burst forth from its maw. Anticipating this, Estinian dove clear of the withering heat, rolled, and regained his feet within striking distance. Unerringly, he thrust at the dragon's wing, tearing through the leathery skin, and was rewarded with a pained howl. You'll not escape me again, Estinian roared, but his foe had no intention of fleeing. No, it craved his blood more than ever, and came after him with a vengeance. So began a game of cat and mouse. The dragon lashed out with fire, fang, and claw. Using the lay of the cavern to his advantage, Estinian succeeded in evading the worst of its wrath, striking back where the opportunity presented itself, and so the dance continued for a time, with neither side able to gain the upper hand. Eventually, however, the rigours of battle began to tell on Estinian, and his lance grew heavy in his hands. Must end this quickly. As it turned out, the cavern itself would be the first to succumb. Shaken by countless wayward blows, a cluster of boulders came loose and rained down upon Estinian without warning. Though he managed to fling himself away just in the nick of time, he found his footing scant yards from his foe. Too close. The dragon's tail caught him full in the chest, sending him flying into the cavern wall. He crumpled to the ground, the breath knocked out of him, and lay there limply as his foe closed in to administer the killing blow. Lucky bastard. His vision already darkening at the edges, he clung to his consciousness and willed his body to move, but it would not obey. An instant later, the dragon loomed over him, its molten eyes steeped in hatred, and time seemed to slow. He watched helplessly as the beast filled its lungs and stared into its maw as fiery death welled up within and began creeping towards him. But just when it seemed certain that he would be engulfed, the creature's head lurched sideways, spilling fire everywhere and nowhere. Estinian did not pause to wonder why. Summoning what remained of his strength, he leapt into the air, and at the height of his leap, he became as one with his lance and descended, tracing an arc worthy of the Azure Dragoon himself. With the full force of his weight, he came down upon his foe. The beast shuddered, collapsed to the ground, and was still. Half in a daze, Estinian took in a sight of the first dragon he had ever slain. Only then did he notice the arrow protruding from one of its eyes. Moments later, a familiar face emerged from the shadows to stand beside him, a longbow in hand. Estinian frowned. "This is not the way to the Holy See." "I know, but I thought the journey home would pass more swiftly, in good company." "You have my thanks, sir." A wry smile formed on his saviour's lips. "Aymeric, and it shall be thanks enough if you remember my name. Though I shan't object to a tankard of ale back in Ishgard." In spite of his exhaustion, Estinian could not help returning his grin. And here we go. That concludes another chapter from Chronicles of Light. And this one was titled none other than Through Fire and Blood, as part of the Tales from the Dragonsong War series. This is probably one of my favourite sort of battle scenes, and really where you get to see Estinian sort of come to life off of the pages. I think this was really well written, and yeah, it was definitely worth sharing with you if you've never heard it before. So hopefully this was interesting, but yeah, for more videos like this in the future, feel free to leave likes below. It kind of gives me a gauge of whether or not it's worth continuing with them on this platform. So thank you all kindly for watching once again. Enjoy the rest of your day, and I'll see you all next time.